Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. My favorite topic, street photography. And to go over it with us, Zeiss Lens Ambassador Kenneth Hines Jr. is joining us. Welcome to the virtual space, Kenneth.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here today and share with you all about some of the pictures that I've done.
Awesome. I know it's been a wild year. It's especially for street photography. The past year it's been a little rocky, a little shaky, but hey, we got a preview of these images. You guys are definitely in for a treat over the next hour. Kenneth's going to be talking about letting your feelings guide you. So really just getting into the moment. We always like when we have these creative process discussions where it's not just all technical stuff all the time, but getting behind the mind of the photographer and learning the stories and learning what's going through your head and how you're trying to convey what you're trying to convey. So super excited for the next hour. And whether you've joined us a million times or you join us for the first time, we will be taking your questions throughout. Kenneth has given us the green light. If you have a question during, throw it in. If you're here on Zoom, we have the Q&A module there. And if you're joining us on Facebook or live stream, you can simply drop your question or comment into the comment section, and we'll get it routed over here to ask it to Kenneth. So that being said, huge thank you to our sponsor for today's event, Zeiss Lenses. Kenneth, take it away, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I thought, there's a lot of content out there. And as was shared, a lot of people give the sort of technical uh, side of street photography. And I didn't want to take that approach. I actually want to talk about some of the images that I've done and also present several new images that a lot of people have not seen me share online before. So kind of just jumping right in because I definitely always like to stick to a material driven broadcast. So I want to get through as much of the content as possible and get through as many questions as possible. So a little bit about me. I'm a Zeiss Lenses ambassador, also a Google and Surrey ambassador. I am a photographer that's actually featured for the 2021 Adobe Lightroom splash screen cover. So if you utilize Lightroom, you may have seen my picture there. I'm a multidiscipline photographer. Basically, I photograph everything. Nothing is off limits to me. So I don't like introductions or things about myself going too long. So with that said, we'll get started. So this first image is one that I took that some people have seen over the past year now, which is in Times Square. And I avoid Times Square like the plague. It's so many people. Of course, this was pre-pandemic, it was a lot of people. It just really frustrates you sometimes to go through Times Square. You have to be in the right mindset to go through there. So I decided one day I was in a chipper mood and I decided to just pick up my 35, or I'm sorry, my Bodice 25 and just stand on the street corners because I just wanted to look at the movement that was going around. Look at, people are rushing through. Some people are gazing at the different billboards that are out there in Times Square. And I hadn't really shot with a wide angle lens in Times Square. And when people see this with the sort of long exposure here, where the people are sort of, drifting along, a lot of people assume I use a tripod. I never use a tripod for street photography. So this is actually handheld. The way that goes about is I simply know my limitations when it comes to how long I can handhold my camera and lens combination without having any kind of movement. Now, I will say I do cheat sometimes. If there's like a post or, a mailbox on a street corner, I will use that to where I could go even longer if I want to. But if I don't have that, it's always handheld. And so I just really wanted to drag the shutter a little bit of the people at the intersection, crossing the street. And, that was kind of my focus for the day. I actually stayed out there about 2 hours. Most people don't spend that long in Times Square if you're in New York and live there. You don't spend that kind of time in Times Square. So, first question is, what camera or cameras do I utilize? So, I've gone through many different camera systems over the years, but the current ones right now is the Sony Alpha 9, the Sony Alpha 6000. I know that one's going to surprise a lot of people, as well as the Sony Alpha 7R 2 and 3. So the reason for my choices is that the Alpha 9, many people position it as a sports camera or wildlife camera, but I never utilize it for the burst shooting. Yes, it does 20 frames per second, but since I've owned this camera since it came out in 2017, I may have only tried burst shooting maybe 3 or 4 times in that time frame. The reason I like that camera for street is because it's the best on autofocus. It really is the camera to where you can't miss a shot. If you do, you did something wrong. That's how I look at it. Having that extra mode dial also allows me to have better shooting experience. Just having uh, those specific menu options outside of the camera, it just kind of makes it a lot easier for me. Now the 6000 is a surprise because it's like if you have an A9, why have an A6000? Especially, it's 7 years old this year. The reason being is I just like keeping it because many people assume my pictures look the way that they do because I use expensive equipment. That's not the case. I can use a Sony A6000 and still take the same pictures that I would with the A9. Yes, it has older features, it doesn't have the same focusing system of the newer cameras, but I really love this camera because it's a smaller body, it's much lighter, and for those times when I really want to be discreet, I can do that with the 6000. And also, just great for any time when people have those comments of, you're only great because you have an A9. Well, let me show you the A6000 pictures. And so it just always, surprises people about that. And then also I have the 7R2 and 3. So I recently retired the 2 and switched back to the R3. But now I'm actually retired the R3 because I'm getting the new Sony Alpha 1. So I'm excited about that. I don't shoot a lot of street with the higher megapixel cameras just because for street, it's not necessary to have 42 megapixels. I prefer my 24 megapixel cameras. That's why I love the 9 and the 6000. So here's what lenses do I utilize for my street photos? So I have broken this up into two different sets. So the first are my street trio of autofocus lenses. So I have the Zeiss Bodice 25, the 40 millimeter close focus, and then my favorite, the 85 1.8 Zeiss Bodice. Those are my sort of go-to lenses for any of my street, especially that 85. The reason why I started with an 85 was because most people associated street with 35 millimeters, 50 millimeters. I wanted to be doing something different. I don't like following the crowd. So when I first started using an 85 about four or so years ago, I got the comments that that's not street photography. That's not a street lens. When you purchase a lens, if you go into B&H and you look at every single lens that's on a shelf, it doesn't say street lens 50 millimeter, wedding lens 70 to 200. It just has the focal length. It does not have a specific genre. So why classify lenses that way? That's why I decided to try out the 85. And just because of my specific kind of nature and character, it was more comfortable for me. That's why I started with the telephoto lens. But now, because I've gotten so used to it, I can shoot wider. So these are some of the examples of shooting those various lenses. The 25 really gets more of the scene, but I'm having to be a lot closer to my subjects. The 40 is a nice middle ground, not too tight, not too wide. Good lens choice for those moments where I might be indecisive. I don't know what I want to do for that day. Do I want to focus on specific people, or do I want to include some of more of what's around people into the scene? It just depends on how I feel. And of course, you have the 85 where I just love that long reach with that lens. So then I also have my manual focus trio of lenses, which are the Zeiss Loxia 21, the 35, and 50 millimeter lenses. So I like using manual lenses just because it slows me down. My shooting is a lot different. I'm more a part of the scene. I'm more a part of what I'm doing. I'm more a part of actually focusing on utilizing my camera, really analyzing the compositions more. With autofocus, I tend to speed through things. And with the pandemic taking place, it made me realize that more. So I actually kind of made more of a shift from using autofocus to more manuals this past year. And it has helped me kind of focus more on the types of images that I produce. So a lot of people have a lot of hesitation with using manual focus lenses, but they are very easy to use. The one key difference is that you don't utilize manual focus lenses the same way that you use an autofocus lens. Just don't. And once you understand that, it's very easy. And I know someone's probably going to ask this question: why have manual specific lenses as opposed to using your autofocus lenses in manual? The reason being is my Zeiss Bodice lenses do not have any of these markings that you see on the screen. So I don't ever know where my actual distance is because it's a focus by wire system, whereas the Loxia lenses are mechanical. So once I set my zone focus for that lens, I exactly know where the focusing is because I can see those measurements on the lens. So having that mechanical operation makes it easier to actually go about manually focusing. And plus, it's the actual true way to do manual focus. If you're utilizing the focus by wire lenses in manual, you're not really getting a true manual focus experience.
Kenneth, we did have a couple questions already. One is going back to the first image you showed in Times Square with the blur.
Mhm.
So we had Joanne, who's joining us from Facebook, asking how long can you handhold? So what point do you set your shutter speed that is kind of like your make or break line for getting a solid image? And then Jerry, who's joining us here on Zoom, is asking if you remember what approximate shutter speed you were at on that Times Square photo.
Yes. So I was maybe about a fourth of a second. I generally about a fourth to a tenth of a second. That's usually how long I can handhold. The depending on the lens, in that case, because it was a wider lens, a 25, I can sometimes get away going a little bit longer because the wider lenses are a little bit forgiving when it comes to motion versus more telephoto lenses. So on good days, I can get about a tenth, sometimes a little bit wider or a little bit slower. Just depends.
That's some steady hands, steady hands. Now we have a question from Nanso joining us on live stream. In particular, you were just talking about focusing and the difference between manual focus and autofocus with the zone focusing. What do you use primarily? Do you still zone focus when you're using the cameras that have the automatic focus lenses, or are you using the benefits of autofocus when you are using the non-manual lenses?
So with the autofocus lenses, I don't ever switch them to manual just because I can't ever pinpoint the distance. Now the good side of the bodice lens is because it has that OLED display. So if you are using that lens in manual, you actually can get away with that. Some of the other lenses you can't do that because you're not ever sure of where your focus is. So once you set it, you're not sure of where that is. It can be anywhere. And if you want to go back for reference, oh, where is my focusing at? You can't tell.
Mhm.
That's the thing of why using the autofocus lenses in manual doesn't work too well versus, the Loxias here. If I hold that up, if I set my aperture to say f8, and then wherever my distance is between that area on this ring, I know once my subject gets into that parameter, everything's going to be in focus because I can see that. I know that it's going to always be set. If I need to remind myself, oh, what am I set to? It's
Mhm.
right there. There are some photographers that will put a little bit of black tape to hold the focus. Now, great thing with these lenses, the focus does not slip. So I've never had to worry about that. Once I set it, I don't have to worry about shifting it. Now I do have those moments where I accidentally hit it. That's where because I have done that, fortunately enough, I'm smart enough to remember maybe you want to go back and check the focus to make sure you got it right. A couple of times I have totally missed a shot.
Mhm. Now,
Um,
now, what about as far as modes? Are you a single point? Do you use tracking? Do you use the face and eye detect? Now that you're getting the Alpha One, I know they're going to have incredible upgrades to the autofocus on that. Which settings do you use particularly for autofocus?
so I always stay with flexible spot. And I do the switch horizontal vertical option with flexible spot. So that way, depending on if I'm taking a photo horizontally, my focus point is in the spot that I want it. And then when I also go to take those portrait oriented photos, the focus area shifts into the area that I want it for that orientation as well. So a lot of the shots that I take, because I'm very specific on how I shoot my street images, that I actually don't always look at the screen when I take an image, because there are some moments where I just have to react. I don't have time to really focus and compose, but I know where my focus is, and I know it's a quirky thing. I know it's hard to explain it. I have demonstrated this during workshops before to show people how it works, because I'm like, that's the best way. I can never do it. You have to be there to see it.
Now, do you Nanso just re-upped on that question? Do you use single autofocus or continuous? Do you just keep continuous focus on while you're shooting street?
That's a good question. So I use both. Here's why I use both. I use continuous for subjects that are moving. I use single for subjects that aren't moving. The reason why I don't keep it on one versus the other, for example, I don't keep it on continuous, is because if I'm focused on a subject that's not moving, the camera is still going to be trying to find something to focus on in wherever your framing is for your focus. So it could be that very split second that you take an image and it's not focused on the area that you want it to.
Mhm.
So in that regards, I will utilize single because my subject isn't moving, so I don't have to worry about anything shifting. But if my subject is moving, definitely continuous.
All right, and we'll sneak one more question in, Kenneth, before we let you continue on here. And I think this will kind of set the stage for looking at some more of your images. Michael, who's joining us on Facebook, asks how much. I know now. I know you said you don't always have your eye up to the viewfinder, so I know you probably do shoot from the hip at least some of the time. What percentage do you shoot from the hip, from the chest, not looking into the either the LCD or the viewfinder?
Hip and chest is probably, I would say, 98% of the time.
Wow.
It's very seldom that I'm at eye level. And the reason being, and you're right, that is a good segue for some of my images, is that you'll see that they're either right at someone's, like right a smidge below their eye level, or very low below their eye level. And the reason for that is because it gives a nice perception as far as making people look bigger than life, because you're able to get the tallness of the buildings behind someone while also including that person or that subject or subjects within that frame. Because if I take it either at eye level, or say I'm photographing someone that is much shorter than I am, I'm aiming downward. So I'm looking at the street. There's nothing interesting about the pavement. So that's why I specifically like to either be perfectly dead on, like this image that you see on the left, where it's perfectly straight. But I'm kneeling on a moving train, which was how I got that with a manual lens. I don't know, because that train was very raggedy. But I just like having where I'm right at that point or below someone's field of view.
Perfect.
So some tips for street photography. Number one, do what's most comfortable and natural for you. Point two, do what's most comfortable and natural for you. And number three, do what's most comfortable and natural for you. I can't say that enough. The reason being is because I see a lot of people that will look at other photographers, and it's like they want to do exactly what they're doing, even if it doesn't really suit their style or how they feel. And especially with street photography, I feel like it's more about that moment. What do you feel like doing that particular day? What do you want to capture? How do you want to capture it? That's what you have to think about. It's not about, oh, I saw Kenneth do this picture. Let me go out here and use this lens and take that same picture. No, is that what you really feel? Because once you take that image, what do you think about it? Anytime I ever have someone that takes a workshop or a critique session with me, I like to talk with them and ask them first, what was going through your mind when you took this image? Do you like this photo? Is this an image that you feel is worthy of printing or submitting to an award contest or something? Like, what is it that was going in your mind to take that picture? So many, I tell a lot of people this, that I'm fortunate that I started photography before social media, because I didn't have where those distractions affected how I viewed certain things, that determined the type of gear that I purchased, because I have been Sony my entire career. This is over 12 years that I've shot Sony. I go back to the old A100, A300 days. So that shows you how long I've been with Sony. And back then, no one shot Sony pretty much. It was, the big two, Canon and Nikon. That's what everybody utilized. And everyone said, if you really want to do good photography, you have to get rid of your Sony. But I just didn't feel that way. I stuck with what I liked. That's what I felt in me to have. So that's what I shot with. And I feel like that's just something that is missed very often. So just a few points to remember. Have anticipation, being unobtrusive. That's something that I'm going to talk a little bit more with some of the other images. Know your equipment, because why this is important is because being able to take an image on the fly, you really have to know your equipment. There are times where I'm not looking at my camera, but I know it's set. I know how I shoot. I just have that muscle memory to where I can hold up an image, take the shot. And I actually have a friend of mine that was a witness to this. I took a photo, didn't look at it, but I just saw this woman crossing the street. But I loved her patterns on her scarf and her jacket. That's what got my attention. And I knew I wanted that image. And so I took it. Wasn't certain if I got it, but I felt it. I said, I know I got that image. And I only had one. I only had one. Focus was nailed. Everything was perfect. Next point is visualize the image before you capture it. I don't take a lot of images, because if I don't feel it, then I know I don't need it. I don't want to go through thousands upon thousands of photos and I'm only using a couple hundred maybe. If I'm not feeling a specific photo, and there are times where I have seen the most perfect image, but I don't capture it because my mindset wasn't there. I might see perfect image. That's good for an 85, but what I have on my camera right now is a 25 millimeter. I can't get the shot. I don't worry about it. That's the beauty of photography. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of missed opportunities, but think about the ones that you do capture. So that's just the fun of the game for me. And then lastly, be a part of the moment. I feel a lot of people just have disconnect from their photography. Feel what's around you. Be a part of what's around you, which is, enjoying that moment. You really have to be a part of the scene to capture those images that mean the most to you. It's not about the Instagram world, it's not about the Facebook world, YouTube. It's about, do you like what you're doing? Because there are going to be people that don't like the images that you take. That's okay. Everyone's not going to, but do you like it? Do you enjoy what you do? So, of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and I really have enjoyed capturing these people's images of people with masks on. And I saw this one, and at the time when I shot this, I did not know her mask said sweet talk on it. It wasn't until I was going through editing and I said, her mask says sweet talk on it. I'm like, that's kind of cute. And, I went with black and white for this because, her mask was black and white. And for certain pictures, I just love the black and white as opposed to doing a color uh, version of an image. There are times where I might mix it up. I might keep both, have a color version and a black and white. Just depends on what I felt when that image was taken and what I visualize it to be. This was one when my first flight during the pandemic, I've only done one. This was at Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta Airport. And I was waiting for my flight. So while I was doing that, I just walked around the new international terminal there and was taking pictures of people with their mask on. And, to kind of really show, this is where we're living in right now. This is what has sort of become our normal life. You're masked up, you're going to this and that of places. And to have pictures of that, was really important for me just to kind of show, hey, this is something that I went through in my life. Look back at these pictures, 10, 20, 30 years from now, you know, oh yeah, I remember, we were going through a pandemic here. So this was one that I really enjoyed, where I was teaching a workshop and I was sitting in this location for about 2 hours. And so sometimes I love to do a lot of people watching. And it's kind of goes back to how I said about being a part of the scene. So I like to really analyze what's going around, look at people, what they're doing. And I especially love children. They always have the best facial expressions, always. And so I saw this woman come over, and this was around Christmas time in 2019. And I knew I can sometimes look and just think, there's a picture that's going to come out of this. Let me just be prepared. And I caught this and I thought it was the most adorable photo ever. And, it was just having that anticipation. I knew I was going to get a photo out of that. Am I always right? Not so much, maybe 80% of the time. But I just waited for it. I was like, I'm waiting for that specific photo that I want. And that's what I caught right there.
Kenneth, I'm going to jump in with a question real quick. It kind of pairs with that image right there. 'Cause we had a question from Barbara joining us here on Zoom, asking if you ever have problems photographing people on the street, how do you approach it? And I guess that always spins into the street photography question of, is there things that are off limits? Children, the homeless. How do you address sensitive topics like that? How do you address taking images of children on the street? Is it something where you don't go out of your way, or you do you ask permission? How do you handle all that?
So that is a great point. And so one of the points that I was going to make is determining what street style best fits for you as a photographer. I prefer being discreet. That's why I really love using my 85 millimeter lens. But I like doing that because I know there are some people who they'll take their camera and they'll just come up into your face, take a photo and walk off or something. I don't personally like that sort of approach because I really like to have, compassion with people. I like to think of it, if I was in that situation, how would I respond to someone doing that to me? And I take that into consideration a lot. I try to do street photography. I don't want to look like a threat to anybody. That's very important. You don't want to look like a threat because if you don't look like that to someone, no one will ever bother you, and people actually enjoy what you do. And the reason I say that is because there have been a couple of times where one has seen me actually taking pictures of them and was perfectly okay with it. And we actually ended up doing a photo shoot together after that because she enjoyed her picture so much. I actually had another that saw a video from Jason Vong, and they followed my Instagram account and knew a couple that I had just posted that same day on Instagram. So they tagged that couple And they're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you took this image. So anyone that ever spots their photos that I've taken, if they come across them at any given point, I always print them a large print, kind of like the images that you see behind me, for them to have along with the original digital file, so they can do whatever they want. I don't charge people for those images. I do this for the fun, and it just started out with giving me something different to do, but now it's kind of grown larger than what I intended it for to be, where I really like to connect with people. I like to feel what they feel. I had a picture that will never see the light of day, but I didn't know I took this, where a woman was waiting for a train, and the doors opened. I was on the train and she was on the platform, and she was waiting for a different train at Marcy Avenue. And when I got back home and looked through the images, I saw that she was crying. And, I kind of got sad off of that, because had I known, I would have gotten off to see like what was wrong with her, like why was she crying? And I did not know that at the time. I just took the picture, but really wasn't in tuned to that specific image. And so because, she was someone that, clearly hurting, something is wrong, I don't know what's going on in her life that has brought her into tears, but that's something that I would never post, because I don't like posting things where people are not, you know, looking their best. I don't like posting images where people aren't feeling their best. So I take a lot of time to have compassion for the people that I'm photographing. So any pictures that people see, it's always going to be a people in their best way possible. That's simply it.
That's a perfect explanation, and a hello and shout out to Jason Vong, who's joining us here, and he remembers that moment. He said that that photo was an epic moment. So thank you for that, Kenneth.
And hi, Jason. I knew he would be here. Um, so this one was a very interesting one. So Chicago is usually, you usually see a lot of people on the streets of Chicago. And this particular day, I don't know why, when I wanted to frame specific compositions like this, no one wanted to walk down the street. I had to wait and wait for this image, and there's another image that was after this. No one was walking down the street. So to get this photo, I actually had to wait a while. I saw this woman way down the street, and I saw this parking garage and this exit only sign, and I wanted to frame someone right in the middle where the spotlight was, but no one was coming. I'm like, this is anticipation extreme. It's like, I know I want this photo. I see a person. Now, of course, they could always go into another door, might quickly turn the corner, who knows? But I was like, I'm going to stand here because I hope she gets to this point. Now, this is one of those moments where if you miss the focus for this and you have to take another photo, you're not going to be very happy with yourself. I would have been very displeased. But I got it. I got the shot. Got her perfectly centered, got that shot. So like with using the wide angle lens, I really love capturing reflections. So whenever there's inclement weather, 9 out of 10 times you can expect me outdoors. I don't like clear blue sky days. I usually don't photograph on those days. It's always if it's raining, if it's overcast, if there are clouds in the sky, those are the primary times when I'm actually photographing. So like here, I love capturing reflections, people at intersections, capturing the reflection off of one of the parking garages in Chicago. And the way that I maximize those reflections is you have to get as close to the reflecting plane as possible. That's how you really get that unique sort of effect of having that reflection. So there are times where my camera, where I have my little clips here, they're in the water because that's how low I get to really get those unique reflection shots that I take. So do I, risk, I have gotten my cameras wet, they're meant to be utilized. And I don't I baby my cameras because they always still look brand new, But I do still go in there to get the shots that I want. So like here, World Trade Center Path Station, I love the reflections there, utilizing my wide angles. And this is an example of an autofocus image versus the manual focus lenses. And I just flip between the two. Some days I'm having a manual focus day. Other times I'm having a autofocus day. And so, getting more reflections, utilizing the 21, the 25 here. I was at an intersection and I saw a lot of people, you know, that was crossing this specific one, and I happened to see this puddle. So I actually stayed there for about 15 minutes, just capturing several people. And I just happened to capture this one of this lady trying to flag down a taxi. And so she was looking the opposite way because I forgot what happened behind me, but her reaction and her son's reaction just, they both shifted and I caught that shot. And I was like, this is perfect. And so like this image, I really love having what's around, really encompassing my compositions. So sometimes I'll just make a subject look very small while you have this big structure like the World Trade Center Path Station in the shots. That's kind of like my signature framing. You know, kind of having people towards the bottom of my frame, and then you have all this ginormous happenings at the top. I really love composing that way. And one thing I love doing is going to specific locations on a regular basis because you're always going to see something different. You have no, especially New York City, you can go to the same place every single day. You're bound to see something different, drastically different every day. So this was one where I actually didn't expect this photo, but I don't know what made me actually watch this woman pushing her child down the street on Fulton. But I was like, let me just track this and see where we're going with this. And just out of nowhere, her child just popped up and peeked out the side for that one shot and then went back down. And I was like, I don't know why he did that, but he did, and I got that shot. And so that's why I use flexible spot. If I was shooting or zone focus or wide focus, it wouldn't have focused on his face the way that it did. And just because of how I framed my shots, the focus dropped right there. So that's how I got the focus perfectly right on that photo. So still, same street, captured someone else that was taking pictures of her friends. I really loved what she was wearing. That stood out to me. Different colors, patterns. That stands out to me. Very rare do I photograph or have pictures of people wearing solid colors, especially black, because that really doesn't add a level, different layers to the image. Um, so I tend to kind of steer clear of all black. I generally like patterns. So here you see her clothes underneath are all black, but she has on that pop of color. That's why I focused in on her.
Kenneth, we had a question in particular about your use of the 85 millimeter. Teresa, who's joining us on Zoom, asks if by using the 85 millimeter, you kind of feel a little bit far away from the action, like a paparazzi, and if you can further expand upon that into what goes into your choice of a certain focal length when you're out shooting. Are there times where you're like, you know what, I feel like being right up in the action? Or are there times where you're like, you know what, I don't feel like interacting. I just want to kind of sit back and observe from a distance?
So for a lot of people, I think because it's not usually tied to street photography that much, the 85 sometimes seems like it's a very far away lens when it really isn't. Because if you're on a subway train in New York, say if I'm sitting on one side by the window, I can actually still photograph someone on the opposite side on the aisle seat without cutting off any faces or anything like that. I've done that. So you don't have to be as far away from someone as you might think with an 85. But it also comes down to what type of composition you're looking for. So if I do want to, maybe get closer, I can still do that with an 85, but it's not always the case of my thought process with the 85. It just depends on the situation and what I see. So how I go about choosing what I use, because I don't, one thing that I will mention, I don't switch lenses throughout my days of while I'm photographing. I'm usually only taking 3 lenses, and whatever lens I start with, I might only change once and that's it. Because of course I'm using prime lenses, so I don't want to be changing lenses all throughout the day. And I like to really have a specific focus. So I don't want to be indecisive like that, where I'm like, okay, let me switch to the 21. No, let me go to the 85. You know what? I'm thinking the 40 is better. I don't want to have to go through all of those different changes and just use what I have. So sometimes I'll might even limit myself to just 2 lenses for the day, because I don't want to really have to think about what I want to do while I'm shooting. So the reason, for the 85 is because, it's just comfortable for me at the start when I started doing street about 4 years ago. But I don't I don't ever feel that I'm too far away with it. It just depends on the type of image. So like this one here, this police officer, before I took this, we a friend of mine and I, we were actually out, and she was on the sidewalk, and we just happened to start up a conversation with her because she was busting people left and right that were blocking the intersection once the light turned red. And so normally I don't, ask anyone as far as taking their picture, but in that scenario we did. Is it okay if we take your picture? So we wanted to take pictures of her busting people at the intersection. And I caught that one photo, and I'm like, her look said it all there. So I wasn't that far away from her. I think that's why I really like the 85, because it just gives that perception that it is, but it really isn't. When people actually see in person the images that I take and how close I am, they're actually very surprised by that.
Perfect.
So, so this is one where um, the guy knew that we were taking a picture, so it came by, and I was like, "Oh, this is very interesting." And he saw that we had cameras. Sometimes people will see that you have a camera and they actually be excited. So this guy was loving it. Like he was up there kind of posing on the shop and all. I was like, okay, let me get my camera going here. And sometimes you don't ever really know what people's reactions are going to be. But I like to analyze people before I go about it. So I've never had an issue with anyone saying, "Oh, can you delete that picture or not take my photo?" I really take a lot of time to analyze the situation. If an image seems too risky to take, even if it's the best photo I could take, I don't do it, because I myself don't feel like it's worth the risk, and I can just get something later. Hopefully I come with something that's even better than this photo. So I don't put myself in those situations to where I might have someone that might abuse me, or want to do anything of harm, or might dislike, whatever it may be. So I really pick and choose what specific subjects I capture. And I feel a lot of people might don't do that with their street photography, but that's just my preference, because again, I don't want to be invasive. I don't want to really become a part of anyone's personal space. I still want them to feel comfortable. I don't want to be a threat to anybody. So this is one that just walking down the street, I don't think she was making that face at me, but just where the camera captures, it's always fascinating to see what that person's reaction was at the time the photo was snapped. So a lot of times people think that in my pictures, that because their eyes look like they're connecting with my camera, that they're looking at me. Most times they're not. It's just that's where the camera stopped, and their eyes just happen to be in that direction. Because I mean, like for this photo, I wasn't walking like holding the camera the whole time. It's like I came up to the intersection, hold up, take the shot, and then I'm still moving on. I Especially in an intersection, I don't usually stop, take the photo, and keep walking. I'm actually still walking. So that's why I really love the A9 for images like this. So this is one that I don't know why people love birds. I really don't. I don't know why people love birds. So this is one that I took, and a friend of mine, we were out walking and just having to see all these pigeons around. I'm like, okay, let me take some photos of them. So they, you know, New York pigeons, they're not bothered. They are so unbothered. Just took several pictures, and then I just happened to catch this as they were beginning to go in flight. And of course, the camera doesn't have bird um, eye autofocus, but it worked out perfectly, as far as just the tracking that the camera has. And I love the photo. I just didn't know a lot of people would love this too, because again, it's birds. Wouldn't expect that. So there are some scenes like this where I like taking different perspectives. So in one shot, you kind of see that my focus is more so on the train, whereas the other is actually on the lady reading her newspaper. So if someone is, standing there for a while, I like those different perspectives because it has a different story to it. You know, just what people look and view of this, will be totally different from one image to the other. And that's what I love about that, taking those different perspectives. And then again, I love the platform shots, taking them straight down. Um, I really like the stations such as the Astor Place station on the 6 line because it has an S curve. So the trains on the number lines generally have more um, harsh curves than the lettered lines. And so I tend to usually like those stations a little bit more for capturing people on the platform just because that curvature, it pushes them kind of outside a bit. So when I'm looking straight down, they're kind of being brought out. So I don't have to worry about, kind of coming out too far or actually being able to single specific people out. So like on these, they're perfectly straight platforms because it's letter lines. But I like looking straight down, one shot, I have the train, that's my focus. The image on the far right, I actually have the lady that is focused versus the train, but it's in the background. And then in the middle, you have both. You have the train in focus and you have the people on the platform. And so it just, I like having different elements to my images. And so again, capturing, I could very well cut this image and just make it about her. But what does I feel like the story is bigger than that because people might want to know, well, where is she? What is she doing? Why is she just standing there? People can see, oh, she's waiting on a train. Wonder what she's doing on her phone. Like you kind of expand on the story. And so that's why I like those other elements in the shot. Because I could have cropped that. I could have made it a tighter shot, but would the story have been the same? So another favorite of the birds. Again, don't know why people love birds. So the left shot is taken on the 9 and the right side is taken on the A6000. So many people think just because you don't have the latest and greatest features, you can't take a photo like that. That's proof that you can. My A6000 took that photo on the right. Looks just as good as the image that's on the left. That's taken with the Alpha 9. So it doesn't really matter about what you're using. It's about knowing what you have and using it to the best of your ability. That's all it is. So people wonder how I get away with the subway shots. I like photographing crowded trains. Why is that? Because if you do run into a situation, it's not very easy for people to really get through a crowded train. That's my thought process behind it. But it also makes it easier because people don't know who you're looking at. You could be looking at 10 different other things. So it's when you're kind of isolated with a person, that's usually a situation that I find, no, I'm not going to risk that because they're going to know there's no one else around. I have a camera and they see that, they're going to know. So that kind of puts people in that kind of situation where they might feel like you're a threat to them. So you might have a confrontation out with that. But on a packed train, not so much because there are other elements involved. So people are a little bit not on guard when it comes to being around other people. There's other things going on. So that's why I prefer packed trains as opposed to those that aren't. Then again, you have where I handheld this. This is using with the manual Loxia 21. I was standing at an intersection and I saw a taxi SUV coming down the street. Now, this can be a very difficult photo to take because you have to time it right. Because I still wanted the lady that was at the street corner. So if I was too early in starting this, the taxi would have blocked her. So I really have to gauge the speed of the car to where I need it to stop based on my shutter speed. So that way it falls in the right spot. Because if I'm just a smidge off, the taxi's not in the shot or it's covering my subject. So it's very difficult to do. It's very mathematical in doing images like this. But it's not difficult. It's not hard to do. Once you practice at it, it's very easy. So this is one that a lot of people love, and people probably would have said something if I didn't show this. So this was an image that I did not like. I'll be honest, I did not like it when I took it because I didn't think it was a great photo. I sent this to one of my friends and my cousin while I was still on my flight, and they both had the same reaction. OMG, you took that? I'm like, yeah, on my flight. I'm still on the plane right now. They're like, you have to show her this. I was like, really? You think it's good? So by the time that message got to me, the lady was already, because we were now parked at the gate, and she was already in the aisle getting off the plane. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go find her